Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Now, I've mentioned on this channel before that I'm quite a big fan of the show First Degree, and they were doing an episode about the serial killer John Williams and one of the missing persons associated with that case. And actually, how that particular individual was caught was that somebody, one of his victims, who was named Joanne, was able to survive his kind of torturous chamber. And they were talking about some of the legend that was surrounding her, saying that this particular victim was able to kind of get away from the serial killer John Williams, and she escaped naked and only wearing a chain around her neck. And I just began to think, wait a second. And then they're saying, yeah, but those aren't the real details. That didn't actually happen. Talking about, once again, the victim of John Williams. And I was like, well, yes, but that's a real story. That is that's like a true event that happened. But that was the case of Cynthia Jaramillo that they were describing. And like, in their defense, they really made a good effort to give the clarification on that. But that brings us to today's case, the story of Cynthia Jaramillo and the serial killer slash sadist David Parker Ray. This took place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Cynthia Jaramillo was working as a sex worker. And we've mentioned on this channel countless times how easy it is for serial killers to prey upon sex workers because they are openly going to a location with them. What David Parker Ray did, along with the help of his accomplice Cindy Hendy, was they lured Cynthia into their trailer and they placed handcuffs on her. David Parker Ray said that he was an undercover police officer and that she was under arrest. And, once the handcuffs are on, they just took her to a location called Elephant Butte, where she was placed in a chamber that would become known as the Toy Box. And it also goes by another name like Satan's Den. And this was something that David Parker Ray used to just do some of the most heinous torture that you could imagine. It's like there was a gynecological chair that had like an electrocution mechanism in it, and he would have a mirror at the top that he would like show down to the victims, because they really said that he enjoyed watching the victims see what he was doing to their bodies through the torturous process. It's like, not to mention that other things like surgical tools, paddles and straps, and just all various types of torture methods were going on in the toy box. And like sometimes David Parker Ray is even referred to as the toy box killer. But what I really like about this case is, and the only kind of thing you can say in that manner, is that Cynthia Jaramillo was a strong person. She was a fighter, and she had the will to survive. And the press and the media coverage really focused in on her by saying that, this is her story, really. It's not so much about the serial killer, which we get most of the time. And I would like to thank KRQE News for doing a lot of different segments on this, because they really were able to get a lot of info on just some very small amounts of very small YouTube videos, but they have a lot of info on this from KRQE. And they talk about how Cynthia was able to fight back. She was able to escape because they tortured her for 3 days, doing just countless things. It still brings her to tears to talk about it 10 years later, 15 years later, 17 years later. Still brings her to tears because it sounds unbelievably, painfully torturous. And the thing is, though, they made a mistake, and Cindy Hendy was home while David Parker Ray was just at work, just working an ordinary job. And then Cynthia was able to get her hands on the keys to unlock one of the chains that was binding her down. So she gets her hands on the keys, and she is able to unlock that. Cindy Hendy tries to fight her. She smashes Cynthia in the head with a lamp. But Cindy was able to grab one of the ice picks that was around, one of them, right? And she stabbed Cindy Hendy and took off running. And that is one of the biggest reasons why she was able to escape, because, they have this torture chamber with all these different sorts of weapons and such, if someone were ever to get out. Would you say that that is something ironic, or is that just something that was bound to happen sooner or later? That somebody was able to escape because, once again, she grabbed one of the many weapons that were nearby. But aside from that, it's like, you also had one of the things that I remembered so clearly about this case, and that was Cynthia's running. She's naked. She has a dog collar around her neck of sorts. It's sort of like a choker, really, and that's attached to the chain. So the chain is just dragging along as she's running, swinging by. She's trying to wave down motorists, and they do not stop to help her. I remember that so clearly when I first heard about this one. I was like, oh my gosh, poor woman. But this is something that I would just say it is not unheard of. When people escape these situations and they're trying to get help, it's just like, it's not unheard of. People are just kind of like freaking out and they just drive on by. We even had this with the disappearance of Joan Risch, where, you have a woman who is like possibly seen bleeding with blood running down her legs, walking down the median of a highway, and people just, they give witness accounts, but they don't necessarily stop to help her. I mean, all I'm saying is this stuff is not unheard of. I mean, I wish that people would be like, hey, there's a woman running naked with a chain around her neck. Maybe we should see what's up. But then there's like, oh, gotta get out of here. Good luck to you, lady. But, I mean, that's kind of just, if this case isn't nasty enough, I mean, some people might have been able to give some assistance. But eventually, Cynthia was able to get to the door of someone else's home, and they were able to bring her inside and call the police. That's thus leading to the capture of David Parker Ray. I believe he was actually sentenced to 244 years in prison. In a different source, they said that it was 220 years in prison, but that didn't really matter too much because he died 8 months into his prison sentence from a heart attack. Now, what we got to say about this one is there's a reason why so many people are preying upon sex workers. Do you ever notice that a lot of abductions don't really happen in the area around a self-defense dojo or something like that? I mean, they're preying upon vulnerable people. It's a sign of weakness. And many of the perpetrators involved with this know that it's a sign of weakness. They know that it's like one of the driving things that's driving them to kill. And like whether you want to reference people like Andre Chikatilo or something, and we just mentioned John Williams. They were doing a podcast on John Williams, and that's how I got back into reading up on Cynthia Jaramillo. He was someone who also had sexual inadequacy, and that just, greatly infuriated him, and that's what led to his sort of, tyrannical and destructive behavior. These things happen all the time. It is a sign of weakness, and David Parker Ray is no exception. But what really, with this story, is it really just turns into just a tale of just heroism, of someone who was really ready to break the cycle, someone who just had such a strong will to live that she overcame the odds. But the thing, though, is, I mean, I really remember that Cynthia was saying that it wasn't until she got to the hospital, and like she's just in the hospital, right? And they still have the chain hanging around, that she's still wearing like the choker with the chain tied to it, or well, latched on as it is. And it wasn't until they actually got some, cutters up there that just cut it off. And she said she didn't feel free. She didn't feel like she was free until the chain was removed. And it's like absolutely horrific. And this is a very disgusting case. But the thing about it is, I mean, it's a sick, sad, messed up world that we live in, and it's just a lot of the times we really take these stories like of Cynthia Jaramillo and David Parker Ray, and we just try to force it down and just almost pretend they're not there. But it is a sad world, and hopefully, the world will be a better place at some point. But this story doesn't end there exactly. It's not just that, okay, he's arrested, does 8 months in prison, and dies from a heart attack. It really doesn't end there because he might have murdered as many as 40 different victims. Cynthia was in the torture chamber for 3 days, and she's hearing Cindy Hendy and David Parker Ray talking about the other victims. She knows that there are multiple victims, and Cynthia Jaramillo has been kind of like an activist or just very involved with trying to identify perhaps other people that were involved. They had a missing ID. They had an ID of a missing woman that was in the torture chamber previously. They have just various kind of things that have names on them. One of them says the name Linda. They don't really know how many people David Parker Ray murdered. It's as many as 40 different people could have been murdered by David Parker Ray. We have no idea if that's true or not. Yesterday we were talking about the serial killer John Hughes, and he might have murdered as many as 20 people. With some of these people, it's just like the body counts are just all over the place, and we're just never going to get precise answers. And like I said, it's a messed up world. But it definitely seems like there are multiple victims. Cindy Hendy, the girlfriend of David Parker Ray, who was an accomplice and was fostering this, she was allowing this to happen and just she aiding and abetting, all of those things. She has gone out with authorities multiple times to try and find some of the areas where David Parker Ray had buried the victims, but it's all been unsuccessful. They think she might be making up those stories just to get out of prison for a while, and that's really what I began to be curious about with other people. But I digress from that. I'm going to go down off on a big tangent, but I won't. I mean, it's just like the case of Cindy Hendy, though, the woman who was aiding and abetting, is that they were trying to pass a law in New Mexico where violent criminals need to serve 85% of their sentence, no matter what. Violent offenders. And that would definitely include Cindy Hendy. Not only was she violent with Cynthia Jaramillo, even if she wasn't, she was allowing the violent crimes to take place. She should be a violent offender. Absolutely. But, there's a reason why Cynthia stabbed her with an ice pick. It's because she was a violent offender. But the thing is that this happened prior. The release of Cindy Hendy happened prior to the passing of that law. And she only had to serve 18 years in prison. And that's just disgusting. As many as 40 different people could have been murdered. And even if you just look at Cynthia's own experience, even just that alone, just someone is held for 72 hours. We're talking electrocution in a gynecological chair, holding up a mirror so the victim has to watch, surgical tools, straps and paddles, and just every sort of torturous tool you can imagine is being used. And this person gets out in 18 years. Absolutely unacceptable. Somebody like Cindy Hendy, the girlfriend in this, she should serve not 85% of the sentence, how about 100% of the sentence? And it's like the legal system sometimes really is not on the side of the victims. Some people were leaving a few comments on YouTube about the choice to release Cindy Hendy somewhat earlier. They're saying release her address, I hope someone slices her throat, and those are two different comments, mind you. And not to give out the names of the people who put those things out there. And I do have to push back on that, because we got to live in this world of two wrongs don't make a right, and people taking the law into their own hands sometimes can just perpetuate the cycle of destruction. And really, it's just we got to look at our legal system now and just wonder, how on earth are people getting out so easily? And you hear this a lot from the families of victims. You hear this from the victims themselves sometimes. They come forward and they're just like, somebody did something absolutely heinous to me. They did something absolutely just unbelievably terrible. Why on earth are they ever being released? And it's just, I don't really have a good answer for that other than our legal system needs improvement. I am glad to say, though, that the vast majority of articles around this case that are covering the subject really want to focus in on Cynthia's strong behavior, her will to live, and her ability to try and get the identities of some other victims of David Parker Ray. It's just it's a very, very kind of horrible story, but I don't think that it is completely unbelievable. It's not something that's out of this world. It is very much in this world. It's the story of someone who is preying on the weak. He probably felt inadequate about something in his life, and he was probably just trying to make up for that by torturing people that couldn't fight back, putting people in a vulnerable and compromising situation, and going after them because they weren't in a proper position to defend themselves. The problem was Cynthia Jaramillo was a lot stronger than he had anticipated. And also, I would like to just cite the source that I got from some of the material that I was reading out. That was from the scarechamber.com. That's just like that, the scarechamber.com. And I referenced the news articles, or the videos rather, from the network. And also, like I said, I first got into this because of the podcast First Degree, but trying to get better at citing the sources and just some of the true crime things we've been going through. And there is a full episode/documentary on this. Some people have the documentary channels on YouTube, but they're really just taking stuff from other episodes. You can see a full 40-minute episode on the case of Cynthia Jaramillo. That was one that I watched last year, and just a few other things are out there covering the case. And if you do get more into this, I definitely recommend watching some of the things about Cynthia's efforts to kind of identify victims, and we can turn this into a story of someone's passion and heroism. And we also really just got to kind of put some pressure on lawmakers to wonder, why is our system not helping victims, and why is it always helping the perpetrators? Because it seems like a lot of the legal aspects in our world are really benefiting those who do the crimes, not those who have the crimes done to them and such. But what do you think about this case, and what do you think about the case of David Parker Ray and Cynthia Jaramillo? If you have anything to say at all, I would love to hear your comments. Please drop a comment below. Anything you would like to share is welcome. And until next time.